During my conference in Singapore, my husband's video call changed everything. He confessed he was leaving me for Sarah, my best friend since college, and they were moving to Montreal together. Instead of breaking down, I simply said, "I wish you both the best," and hung up. By the time they realized what happened, I had already sold our dream house and created a new life for myself and our daughters in Vancouver. I was standing on the balcony of my luxury hotel room in Singapore, admiring the glittering skyline, after delivering the biggest presentation of my life. Our Asia-Pacific expansion project had just been approved, and I was finally seeing the fruits of 15 years of dedication. The night air was warm and heavy with possibility, carrying the faint sounds of the bustling city 40 floors below. I took a slow sip of champagne, savoring this rare moment of perfect accomplishment. My phone lit up with James's familiar face, and I answered with a smile, expecting to share my triumph with my husband of 12 years. We had always celebrated our victories together, even from opposite sides of the world. This moment should have been no different. "Hey, we need to talk." His voice was unusually distant, lacking the warmth I'd grown accustomed to. There was something in his tone that made me set down my champagne glass, the celebration forgotten in an instant. The city lights below seemed to dim as I sensed the weight of what was coming. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the sudden knot forming in my stomach. The silence that followed felt endless, filled only by the sound of his breathing and the distant hum of the city. "I've been meaning to tell you this for a while," he continued, his words measured and rehearsed. "I can't do this anymore. I'm leaving you." The words hung in the air between us, thousands of miles apart yet hitting me like a physical blow. But he wasn't finished. "I'm moving to Montreal, with Sarah. Sarah, my best friend since our first day of college, the woman who had been my maid of honor, who had held my hand through both pregnancies, who had been there for every triumph and setback in my adult life. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, that it felt almost absurd. Gripped the balcony railing, feeling the cool metal under my fingers, anchoring myself to reality as my world tilted on its axis. The Singapore skyline blurred before my eyes, but I refused to let the tears fall. Something inside me shifted in that moment, not breaking, but hardening, crystallizing into a new form of strength I didn't know I possessed. "I know this is sudden," James continued, mistaking my silence for shock rather than the calm calculation it was becoming. "But Sarah and we found something real, something we can't ignore. I hope you can understand." "I understand perfectly," I cut him off, my voice steady and cool as the evening breeze. "You and my best friend want to start a new life together. You've made your choice." He hesitated, clearly thrown by my composure. "Look, we can talk about arrangements for the girls, the house." "Good luck with everything, James," I interrupted, again surprising myself with the genuine indifference in my voice. "I truly hope you find what you're looking for." Before he could respond, I ended the call and blocked both their numbers. The city spread out before me, a tapestry of lights and possibilities, and for the first time, I saw my future with perfect clarity. I wouldn't be the woman who fell apart when her husband left. I wouldn't be the friend who was betrayed and broken. I would be something else entirely. I turned back to my laptop, still open to the presentation that had seemed so important just minutes ago. With steady hands, I opened a new tab and began researching real estate agents in Vancouver. The house James and I had built together, our dream home in Toronto's prestigious Forest Hill, would fetch a handsome price in the current market. By the time they realized what was happening, everything would be done. I couldn't have known then that this moment, this single phone call, would be the catalyst for a complete transformation in my life. That my response in the next few minutes would set in motion a chain of events that would show me exactly who I was meant to be. As I stood there, looking out over the Singapore skyline, I felt something new rising within me. Not anger, not pain, but a cold, clear purpose. The woman who had answered that phone call was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, someone who wouldn't wait for life to happen to her. Someone who would take control of her own story. And this was just the beginning. Just 48 hours before that fateful call, my life had seemed picture perfect. I remember standing in our Forest Hill kitchen that Monday morning, surrounded by the warm autumn light streaming through our floor-to-ceiling windows. James had wrapped his arms around me, kissing my cheek as I packed my carry-on for Singapore. Our daughters, Emma and Sophie, ages 10 and 8, sat at the Marble Island, giggling over their breakfast cereals and planning their week with their father. "Don't forget, Dad," Emma had said, her blue eyes serious beneath her bangs. "Thursday is my violin recital. You promised you'd record it for Mom." James had ruffled her hair, promising he wouldn't miss it. Sophie chimed in about her soccer practice, and he'd assured her too that everything would run smoothly while I was away. Our home, a stunning 5-bedroom Victorian we'd renovated together over the years, was the embodiment of our supposed success. Every corner held memories. The living room where we'd spent countless Sunday afternoons reading together as a family, the garden where we'd hosted summer barbecues with friends, including Sarah, and the cozy den where we'd weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical. Sarah had been there through it all. I met her during our first week at University of Toronto, both of us lost trying to find our economics class. She'd been wearing a vintage Led Zeppelin t-shirt and carrying a coffee bigger than her head. We'd clicked instantly, sharing dreams of breaking into the male-dominated world of corporate finance. Through all-nighters and heartbreaks, internships and job searches, we'd supported each other unconditionally. Or so I'd thought. Looking back, there were subtle signs I'd missed. The way Sarah's visits became more frequent when I traveled for work. How she'd stopped sharing details about her dating life over the past year. The slightly too long hugs she gave James at family gatherings. But I'd been too busy, too trusting, too secure in my perfect life to notice these hairline cracks in our foundation. My career had been thriving. As Senior Vice President of International Development at one of Canada's largest investment firms, I'd earned my success through years of sacrifice and determination. The Singapore trip was meant to be the crown jewel of my achievements, securing a merger that would establish our presence across Asia. James had always supported my ambitions, or at least I thought he had. Now I wondered if he'd seen my success as a threat, a reason to seek comfort elsewhere. That Monday morning, as I'd kissed my girls goodbye and hugged James one last time, everything had felt solid, dependable. The life we'd built seemed unshakable. Our marriage had its ups and downs, like any relationship, but we'd always faced challenges together. We'd weathered financial struggles in our early years, supported each other through the loss of James's father, and celebrated countless milestones together. The irony wasn't lost on me that our last moment as a family had been so ordinary, so peaceful. Emma had been wearing her favorite purple sweater, her homework spread across the kitchen island. Sophie had been practicing her soccer footwork in the hallway, despite my gentle reminders about indoor activities. James had helped me with my luggage, his hand lingering on my lower back in what I'd interpreted as affection, but now recognized as guilt. Sarah had even called that morning to wish me luck with the presentation. "You're going to crush it," she'd said, her voice warm with what I'd mistaken for friendship. "Take lots of pictures for me." She'd asked about my travel itinerary, about when I'd be back, information she'd undoubtedly shared with James as they plotted their escape. The weekend. Before, we'd all had dinner together at our house. James, the girls, Sarah, and me. She'd brought her famous tiramisu, and we'd stayed up late talking about future plans. The bitter taste of irony now made me realize they'd been making their own plans right under my nose. While I spoke about the Singapore expansion, they must have been exchanging knowing glances, silently counting down to their betrayal. Our neighborhood, one of Toronto's most exclusive enclaves, had been our home for the past 5 years. The girls had their routines, their friends, their favorite spots in the nearby park. The massive oak tree in our backyard held their treehouse, a weekend project James and I had built together 2 summers ago. Every inch of our life seemed designed for permanence, for stability, for forever. That was the thing about perfect lives. They were often perfect only on the surface. Like a beautiful house with a crumbling foundation, everything can appear flawless until the moment it all comes crashing down. But as I stood in my Singapore hotel room, watching my perfect life dissolve, I realized something crucial. Perhaps this perfection had been a cage of my own making. I'm leaving you for Sarah. The words seemed to hang in the air of my hotel room, echoing off the floor-to-ceiling windows, bouncing back to hit me again and again. Each reverberation brought a new wave of realization, a deeper understanding of what those 5 words truly meant. I stood motionless, my champagne glass still perched on the balcony ledge, the celebratory bubbles now flat and forgotten. The glittering Singapore skyline continued its dance of lights, oblivious to the seismic shift occurring in my world. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, at the pinnacle of my career, while my personal life crumbled like a house of cards. We didn't plan for this to happen, James continued, his voice taking on that self-justifying tone I'd heard him use with difficult clients. It just evolved. Sarah and I, we connected on a deeper level. We understand each other in a way that what, James? My voice was surprisingly steady, almost clinical. In a way that 12 years of marriage and 2 children couldn't provide? The city lights below blurred slightly, but I blinked back the tears. I wouldn't give him the satisfaction of hearing me cry. He sighed, a sound I'd heard countless times during our marriage, but never with this weight of finality. I know this is shocking, but we've already found a place in Montreal. Sarah's firm has an opening in their Quebec division, and I can transfer to their architectural department. We thought it would be better to make a clean break, start fresh, somewhere new. The methodical nature of their betrayal struck me then. They hadn't just fallen into this. They had planned, schemed, arranged their new life while I was busy building our family's future. Every late-night work meeting, every weekend coffee with my best friend, every casual inquiry about my travel schedule, it all took on a new sickening meaning. The girls, I managed, my throat tightening. When were you planning to tell our daughters that their father and their honorary aunt are running away together? His pause spoke volumes. We thought, maybe it would be better to wait until you're back. We could tell them together, help them understand. A laugh escaped me, sharp and bitter like broken glass. Help them understand? Help them understand that their father and the woman they trust most, after their mother, have been lying to everyone. That the 2 people who should have protected our family were actually destroying it? That's not fair, he protested, but his voice wavered. We never meant to hurt anyone. Sometimes these things just happen. People grow apart. They find new connections. No, James, I cut him off, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. These things don't just happen. You make choices. You and Sarah made choices. Every secret meeting, every hidden conversation, every lie, those were choices. And now you've made the biggest choice of all. The Singapore traffic hummed 40 floors below, a constant reminder that the world continued turning despite this implosion of my life. A warm breeze carried the scent of night-blooming jasmine from somewhere below, incongruously sweet in this bitter moment. I know you're angry, he began, but I interrupted him again. Angry? No, James, I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. Disappointed that the man I married, the father of my children, turned out to be such a cliché. Having an affair with your wife's best friend? Moving to another city? It's like you're following a handbook for middle-aged crisis. My words hit their mark. I could hear his sharp intake of breath. "It's not like that," he protested weakly. "Sarah and it's real. We've found something special." "Something special," I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Well, I hope this something special is worth destroying our family over. I hope it's worth explaining to Emma why she'll have to live stream her violin recitals to her father from now on. I hope it's worth telling Sophie why the woman who taught her to braid her hair is now going to be her stepmother." The silence that followed was deafening. In that moment, I could almost see him, sitting in our home office probably, the one I had helped him design, surrounded by the life we had built together, while he dismantled it all with a phone call. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said finally, his voice small. "Either of you. It just happened." "Nothing just happens, James. You made this happen. You and Sarah. And now you'll both have to live with the consequences." I looked down at my hand, at the platinum wedding band that had sat on my finger for 12 years. It felt heavy now, like it was weighing me down, anchoring me to a past that was quickly becoming irrelevant. "I wish you both the best," I said, surprising myself with how much I meant it. "I truly do. But don't expect me to make this easy for you. Don't expect me to smile and pretend this is all okay. And don't expect me to be here when you realize what you've thrown away." Before he could respond, I ended the call. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the faint hum of the hotel's air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic below. I stood there, looking out over the city, feeling something shift inside me. The initial shock was wearing off, being replaced by something else, something harder, colder, more determined. I picked up my champagne glass, still half full of now flat champagne, and lifted it to the glittering skyline. "To new beginnings," I whispered, then poured the contents over the balcony, watching the golden liquid disappear into the night air. The next few hours in my Singapore hotel room passed in a strange haze of clarity and chaos. I sat in the plush armchair by the window, watching the sky gradually lighten as dawn approached, my mind racing through memories, analyzing them with new understanding. Every moment, every interaction with James and Sarah over the past months began to take on a different meaning. Last Christmas, when Sarah had given James that rare architectural book he'd mentioned only once in passing, the way she'd memorized his coffee order down to the exact temperature he preferred, the subtle changes in her behavior, canceling our weekly lunch dates, being mysteriously busy during my business trips, her sudden interest in architecture and design that I'd attributed to her home renovation plans. I pulled out my phone, scrolling through photos from the past year. There it was, Sophie's 9th birthday party, Sarah standing next to James, their bodies angled toward each other in a way I'd never noticed before. His hand barely touching her elbow in what now seemed like an intimate gesture. The signs had been there all along, written in a language I hadn't known to read. A notification popped up on my screen, an email from James. "We need to talk about telling the girls." My thumb hovered over the delete button, but instead I found myself opening our family photo album. Emma's first violin recital, Sophie scoring her first soccer goal, family vacations, holiday celebrations, a carefully curated collection of moments that now felt like artifacts from someone else's life. The irony of it all hit me then. Here I was, in one of the most luxurious hotels in Singapore, having just closed the biggest deal of my career, and my personal life was unraveling like a poorly knit sweater. I'd spent years building my professional reputation, meticulously, planning every career move, yet I'd somehow missed the dissolution of my own marriage. My phone buzzed again, Sarah this time. "Please let me explain." The audacity of her message made me laugh, a hollow sound that echoed in the empty room. Explain what? How she'd systematically betrayed years of friendship? How she'd watched me confide my marital concerns to her over countless coffee dates, all while knowing she was the cause? I walked to the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the oversized mirror. I looked exactly the same as I had yesterday. Same shoulder-length dark hair, same green eyes, same small scar above my right eyebrow from a childhood accident. But I felt fundamentally different, as if my cells had rearranged themselves into someone new during the night. The woman in the mirror had just been betrayed by the two people she trusted most in the world. Yet she wasn't crying. She wasn't screaming, or throwing things or falling apart. Instead, she was thinking, planning, calculating. The corporate strategist in me was taking over, approaching this personal catastrophe like a hostile takeover that needed to be managed. I opened my laptop and began making lists, practical, actionable items that would need to be addressed. The house, the kids' schools, our joint accounts, the summer cottage in Muskoka. James and Sarah might have orchestrated their escape to Montreal, but they had underestimated me. They thought they were dealing with just a wife, just a friend. They had forgotten they were dealing with a woman who specialized in international mergers and acquisitions, who handled billion-dollar deals over breakfast. The sky outside was fully light now, the Singapore morning traffic beginning to build. I ordered room service, strong coffee, and a fruit plate I knew I wouldn't touch. My phone continued to buzz with messages from both of them, each one more desperate than the last. I ignored them all, focusing instead on my growing action plan. The first priority would be the girls. Emma and Sophie needed stability, needed to know that while their world was changing, they weren't losing everything. I'd need to find the right schools, the right neighborhood, the right therapist to help them process this transition. They would be hurt, angry, confused, but I would be their rock, their constant in this storm. My assistant's name flashed on my phone screen. "The board wants to congratulate you on the merger. Dinner tonight?" I declined politely, citing jet lag. The truth was, I needed this time. Needed to plan, to think, to strategize. The corporate world had taught me that the first moves in any negotiations set the tone for everything that follows. This situation was no different. I opened my banking app, looking at our joint accounts. James and I had always maintained separate accounts alongside our joint ones. My insistence, born from watching too many friends lose everything in divorces. Another irony, my professional caution had accidentally prepared me for this personal betrayal. The morning sun was now streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows, bathing the room in a warm glow that felt at odds with my cold determination. I walked to the balcony again, looking out over the awakening city. Somewhere in Toronto, James and Sarah were probably together, thinking they had orchestrated the perfect exit strategy. They thought they held all the cards, that they were in control of this narrative. They had no idea what was coming. As the Singapore morning stretched into afternoon, the initial shock crystallized into something more potent. Resolve. I sat at the sleek desk in my hotel room, surrounded by spreadsheets and property listings. The merger documents that had seemed so crucial yesterday were pushed aside, replaced by a different kind of strategic planning. My phone had finally stopped its incessant buzzing. After sending a brief professional email to James stating that all further communication should go through lawyers, I'd blocked both their numbers. Sarah had tried reaching out through every possible channel, email, social media, even attempting to contact my assistant. Each attempt only strengthened my determination. "Mrs. Chen?" My assistant's voice came through the hotel phone. "The board would like to know if you'll be extending your stay in Singapore to finalize the details of the merger." I looked at the property listings on my screen. Luxury homes in Vancouver's West Point Grey neighborhood, all with excellent school districts and views of the Pacific. "No, Lisa. I'll be flying back tomorrow as planned, but I need you to set up some meetings in Vancouver next week. And please connect me with Robert Chen from legal." Robert had handled my prenuptial agreement 12 years ago. At the time, James had been hurt that I'd insisted on one, but my father, a shrewd businessman who'd survived 3 divorces, had been adamant. "Business and love don't mix, sweetheart. he'd said. Protect yourself first. Now, his words echoed in my mind like a prophecy. I opened my email and began typing. Robert, I need your expertise on an urgent personal matter. James and I are separating. He's leaving for Montreal with Sarah Williams. Yes, that's Sarah. I need to move quickly on the house and custody arrangements. The prenup should make this straightforward, but I want to ensure everything is handled properly. Also, I'm looking at properties in Vancouver. Can you connect me with a reliable real estate agent there? Best regards, Victoria. The decisiveness of my words surprised me. There was no emotion, no hint of the turmoil beneath the surface. Just clear, practical steps forward. I was approaching this like any other business deal. Identify the assets, minimize the losses, secure the best possible outcome. My laptop pinged with a new email. The Vancouver real estate agent Robert had recommended. The properties she'd selected matched my criteria perfectly. Prestigious neighborhoods, excellent security, space for the girls to maintain their interests. Emma would need a music room for her violin practice, and Sophie would need easy access to sports facilities. I clicked through the listings, imagining our new life on the West Coast. Vancouver was as far from Montreal as we could get while staying. In Canada, a deliberate choice that would make any custody arrangements clear and defined. The distance would be a natural barrier, forcing James to make real effort if he wanted to maintain a relationship with his daughters. The hotel room phone rang again. Mrs. Chen? Mr. Chen is on line 1. Victoria, Robert's familiar voice was warm but professional. I've reviewed your situation. The prenup is solid. The house is primarily in your name, and given the circumstances, we can push for primary custody. But we need to move fast. How soon can you get back to Toronto? Toronto. I looked at my watch, mentally calculating time zones. I'm flying back tomorrow. I want to list the house immediately. That's aggressive, he said carefully. Are you sure you don't want to take some time to think this through? A knock at my door interrupted us, room service with fresh coffee. I waited until they left before responding. Robert, while I was building my career, my husband and best friend were planning their new life together. They've had their time to think. Now it's my turn to act. He was quiet for a moment. All right, I'll have everything ready. But Victoria, are you really sure about Vancouver? It's a big move. I walked to the window, looking out at the Singapore skyline one last time. Do you remember what you told me when we were drafting the prenup? Sometimes the best defense is a strong offense. They think they're starting a new life? Fine, but they're not the only ones who get to make that choice. After ending the call, I opened my laptop again. The Vancouver property that had caught my eye was still on screen, a modern masterpiece of glass and steel overlooking the Pacific, with a separate music studio that would be perfect for Emma's violin and enough yard space for Sophie's soccer practice. It was nothing like our traditional Victorian in Forest Hill. That was exactly the point. I clicked Schedule Viewing and began composing an email to the girls' current schools, requesting their academic records. Each decisive action felt like a step away from the life that had been shattered by that phone call and toward something new, something entirely mine. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Mom, when are you coming home? Dad's acting weird, and Aunt Sarah hasn't been over all week. I looked at the time, 3 a.m. in Toronto. Emma had always been perceptive, sensitive to the undercurrents of adult emotions. She knew something was wrong, even if she didn't know what. I typed back carefully, I'll be home tomorrow, sweetheart. Everything's going to be okay. Try to get some sleep. It wasn't a lie. Everything would be okay, just not in the way anyone expected. I closed my laptop and walked onto the balcony, feeling the warm Singapore night air on my skin. In less than 24 hours, I would be back in Toronto, setting my plan in motion. James and Sarah thought they were writing the end of our story. They didn't realize they had only written the beginning of mine. The 14-hour flight from Singapore to Toronto gave me ample time to refine my strategy. In business class, surrounded by sleeping passengers, I transformed my grief into a detailed battle plan. My laptop glowed in the dimmed cabin as I meticulously mapped out every step, approaching my shattered marriage with the same precision I used for corporate takeovers. First priority, the girls. I opened a document titled New Beginnings and began outlining their transition plan. Emma was in 5th grade, Sophie in 3rd, young enough to adapt to change, but old enough to be deeply affected by it. I researched Vancouver's top private schools, making notes about their music programs for Emma and sports facilities for Sophie. West Point Grey Academy caught my attention with its exceptional violin program and championship soccer team. Next, I focused on the house. I'd already contacted Miranda Zhang, the city's most ruthless real estate agent. Our Forest Hill Victorian would easily fetch $7 million in the current market. I'd bought it primarily with my own money, a fact clearly documented in our prenup. James had always been talented as an architect, but his boutique firm couldn't match my corporate salary. Mrs. Chen? The flight attendant's whisper interrupted my planning. Would you like some coffee? I nodded, then returned to my laptop. The house sale would need to be quick and quiet. Miranda had already lined up 3 potential buyers, foreign investors looking for luxury properties in Toronto's most prestigious neighborhood. No open houses, no public listings, just discreet private viewings while James was at work. My phone held 17 unread messages from Sarah. I opened the last one. Vic, please, we need to talk about this. The girls deserve better than a rushed decision. I almost laughed at her audacity. The girls deserved better than their father and honorary aunt sneaking around behind their mother's back. But that hadn't stopped them. I deleted the messages without responding. The cabin lights flickered on as we began our descent into Toronto. I opened my calendar, reviewing the appointments I'd scheduled. A.M. Meeting with Robert Chen. Legal. 10 d.a.m. House appraisal. With Miranda 2.0 p.m. Tour of West Point Grey Academy. Virtual, or 4 p.m. Video call with Vancouver real estate agent. Between these, I'd need to pack up our essential belongings without raising suspicion. The movers were already booked for next week, a premium service that specialized in cross-country relocations. They'd handle everything: packing, shipping, unpacking. The girls and I would stay at the Four Seasons until everything was finalized. My assistant Lisa had outdone herself, arranging everything with military precision. She'd even found a luxury furnished rental in Vancouver where we could stay while our new house was being prepared. The rental agreement was already in my inbox, waiting for my signature. The plane touched down at Pearson International just as the sun was rising over Toronto. Through the window, I could see the city skyline emerging from the morning mist. Somewhere out there, in our beautiful Victorian home, James was probably waking up, perhaps texting Sarah, both of them comfortable in the belief that they controlled the narrative. They had no idea that while they'd been planning their escape to Montreal, I'd been 3 steps ahead, orchestrating a completely different story. In their version, I was the successful but absent wife, too focused on my career to notice my marriage crumbling. They cast themselves as star-crossed lovers, victims of circumstance and timing, but they'd forgotten something crucial. I didn't get to where I was by letting others write my story. As I walked through the airport, my heels clicking against the polished floor, I mentally rehearsed what I would say to the girls. They deserved honesty, delivered with age-appropriate sensitivity. I'd already booked them sessions with Dr. Harrison, a child psychologist specializing in divorce and relocation. Trauma. My phone buzzed, an email from Miranda. She'd already found a buyer willing to pay above asking price, no conditions, closing in 2 weeks. Perfect. By the time James and Sarah announced their plans to move to Montreal, we would be settled in Vancouver, our new life already taking shape. I stopped at the airport's Starbucks, ordering my usual double espresso. The barista smiled, asking if I'd had a good trip. I found myself smiling back, genuinely. Actually, I said, it was transformative. The morning traffic was light as my taxi wound through the city streets toward Forest Hill. I used the time to make one final call to Robert Chen. Everything's in place, he assured me. The prenup is ironclad, and given the circumstances, James would be foolish to contest anything. But Victoria, are you absolutely sure about the timing? Moving this quickly is unusual. I watched the familiar streets pass by, each one holding memories I would soon leave behind. Robert, in business, when do we make our biggest moves? When the other side least expects it, he replied, understanding dawning in his voice. Exactly. James and Sarah think they have time to plan their announcement, time to ease the girls into the idea, time to manage the fallout. They think they're in control. By the time they realize they're not, everything will already be done. The taxi turned onto our street, and I could see our house in the distance, its Victorian elegance bathed in morning light. For 12 years, it had been the center of our family's life. Now it was just another asset to be liquidated, another tie to be severed. One more thing, I told Robert. Make sure the sale agreement includes a stipulation that the house cannot be sold again for at least 5 years. I want to make sure they can't buy it, even if they change their minds about Montreal. It was a petty move, perhaps, but sometimes the smallest details sent the largest messages. James and Sarah thought they were writing a love story. They didn't realize they were actually providing me with the perfect opportunity to write something far more powerful, a story of Renaissance. The key turned in the lock of our Forest Hill Victorian for what would be one of the last times. Inside, the house was quiet. James had already left for work, and the girls were at school. Everything looked exactly as I'd left it a week ago, yet it all felt different, like walking through a museum display of my former life. I moved through the rooms with purpose, my heels echoing on the hardwood floors. In the kitchen, James had left his coffee mug in the sink, a small domestic detail that once would have irritated me, but now seemed meaningless. A note on the fridge in his architect's precise handwriting: soccer practice 4 p.m., violin lesson 5:30. He was still playing the role of devoted father, unaware that his carefully structured world was about to shift dramatically. My phone buzzed. Miranda Jang confirming the buyer's offer. $7.5 million, no conditions, closing in 10 days. Above our asking price, just as she'd promised. I signed the documents electronically, each digital signature another step toward freedom. Moving swiftly, I headed upstairs to the master bedroom. The closet still held our clothes side by side, my designer suits next to James's carefully pressed shirts. I noticed several of his favorite items were missing, probably already relocated. To Sarah's condo. The thought didn't hurt as much as I expected. I pulled out my suitcases and began packing methodically. Designer clothes, important documents, irreplaceable photos, everything essential for our new life in Vancouver. The movers would handle the rest next week. In the girls' rooms, I carefully selected their most treasured possessions: Emma's first violin, Sophie's soccer trophies, their favorite stuffed animals and books. Mrs. Chen? A voice called from downstairs. Right on schedule. The home appraisal. Team. I descended the stairs to find Miranda Jang in the foyer, impeccable in her Chanel suit, flanked by her team of experts. Everything's ready, she said, her eyes gleaming with professional satisfaction. The buyers are eager to close quickly. They're offering cash and they're willing to let you set the closing date. I nodded, leading them through the house. They photographed each room, made notes about the custom millwork, the imported Italian marble, the hand-painted murals in the girls' rooms. All the careful details James and I had chosen together over the years, each one adding value to the property we'd lovingly restored. My phone buzzed again, a text from Sophie's teacher. Sophie seemed upset in class today. Everything okay at home? I replied with a reassurance that we'd talk with her tonight, then added another item to my mental checklist. Call Dr. Harrison about moving up our first family therapy session. The appraisal team finished their work efficiently, and Miranda stayed behind to discuss final details. The buyers want to know if any furniture is included, she said, gesturing to our custom-made dining set. I looked at the table where we'd shared thousands of family meals, celebrated, birthdays, helped with homework. All of it, I decided. We're starting fresh in Vancouver. After Miranda left, I moved to James's home office. The space was meticulously organized, architectural drawings pinned to the walls, his drafting table angled perfectly toward the side window. I opened his filing cabinet, removing everything related to our joint assets, property deeds, insurance policies, investment portfolios. Robert Chen would need these. In the kitchen, I heard the front door open. Lisa, my assistant, arriving with the preliminary paperwork from the Vancouver schools. She'd been invaluable these past few days, handling countless details while maintaining absolute discretion. The Vancouver real estate agent sent updated photos of the house, she said, pulling out her tablet. They've accepted your offer, and they're willing to expedite the closing to match your timeline. I scrolled through the images. A contemporary masterpiece overlooking the Pacific, with floor-to-ceiling windows and a separate music studio. Nothing like our traditional Victorian, exactly what we needed. A clean break, a fresh start. What time are you picking up the girls? Lisa asked, checking her watch. 3:30. I want to talk to them before James gets home. The hardest part of my plan, explaining to my daughters why their world was about to change. But kids were resilient, and I'd made sure everything was in place to ease their transition. Top schools, continued activities, professional support. The doorbell rang. The security team I'd hired to change the locks after we left. Another necessary precaution. They worked quickly, providing me with new keys and updating the security system's codes. As they finished, I walked through the house one last time. In the living room, family photos lined the walls. Holidays, celebrations, moments of joy, frozen in time. I took them down one by one, carefully wrapping each frame. These weren't just decorations. They were proof of the life we'd had, the happiness that had been real before the betrayal. My phone lit up with another message from Sarah. The girls keep asking about me. Please, we need to handle this like adults. I deleted it without responding. She'd lost the right to have any say in my children's lives the moment she'd decided to betray their mother. James and Sarah thought they were being clever, planning their new life in Montreal. They had no idea that while they plotted their escape, I was orchestrating something far more significant, a complete reinvention. The grandfather clock in. The hallway chimed 3. Time to pick up the girls, time to begin the hardest conversation of my life. But as I gathered my keys and took one last look at the home we'd built together, I felt nothing but certainty. Sometimes the boldest moves were the most necessary ones. At exactly 3:30 p.m., I pulled up to St. Margaret's Academy in my Range Rover. Emma and Sophie were waiting on the steps, their backpacks and instrument cases creating familiar silhouettes. My heart tightened. This was the moment everything would change for them. Mom! Sophie launched herself into my arms, her soccer uniform still muddy from practice. Emma followed more slowly, her keen eyes already registering something different in my expression. At 10, she'd always been eerily perceptive about adult emotions. You're back early, Emma said, sliding into the back seat. Dad said you weren't. Coming home until next week. I adjusted the rearview mirror, catching their reflections. There's something we need to talk about, girls. How about we get some ice cream? Their favorite ice cream parlor, Sweet Haven, was just a few blocks away. We'd celebrated countless small victories here. Good report cards, winning games, successful recitals. Now it would be the setting for a very different kind of conversation. As we settled into our usual booth, Sophie already digging into her Rocky Road sundae, Emma's violin case propped carefully beside her, I took a deep breath. Girls, some things are going to change in our family. Emma's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. Sophie, younger and less attuned to tension, continued attacking her ice cream. Dad and we're going to be living separately from now on, and we're going to be moving to Vancouver. The words hung in the air. Sophie's spoon clattered against her bowl. But what about my soccer team? We have championships next month. Emma remained silent, her ice cream melting untouched. It's because of Aunt Sarah, isn't it? She finally said, her voice small but certain. My heart clenched. Of course she'd noticed. Emma, with her quiet observation skills, had probably seen the signs I'd missed. Yes, honey. Dad and Aunt Sarah? They're going to be together now. They're moving to Montreal. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. But why? Why can't we all stay? Here? Why do we have to move? I reached across the table, taking their hands in mine. Sometimes adults make choices that change everything. Dad and Aunt Sarah made their choice. Now we get to make ours. We get to start a new adventure together. I hate them, Emma burst out, tears streaming down her face. I hate them both. The other customers turned to look, but I didn't care. I slid around the booth, gathering both girls into my arms. You're allowed to be angry. You're allowed to be sad. All your feelings are valid. Will we ever see Dad again? Sophie hiccuped between sobs. Of course you will. He's still your father, and he loves you very much. We'll figure out visits and video calls. But our home will be in Vancouver now. As I held them, letting them cry, my phone buzzed repeatedly. James, probably wondering why the girls weren't at their after-school activities. Let him wonder. I've found us a beautiful house, I continued, pulling out my tablet to show them pictures. Emma, there's a music studio where you can practice your violin. Sophie, there's a huge yard for soccer practice, and the local team is even better than your current one. Slowly, between tears and questions, I outlined our new life. The prestigious school with its excellent music and sports programs. The view of the ocean from their new bedrooms. The promise of a fresh start. When? Emma asked finally, her practical nature asserting itself through the emotion. Soon. Very soon. We'll stay at the Four Seasons Hotel for a few days while everything gets arranged. My phone buzzed again. James calling now. I declined the call. What about all our stuff? Sophie worried, clutching her treasured soccer jersey. The movers will pack everything carefully, and we get to shop for new furniture for your rooms in Vancouver. As we talked, I could see them beginning to process, to adapt. Children were remarkably resilient when given the right support. The ice cream sat forgotten, melting in their bowls. The bell above the shop door chimed, and I looked up to see Sarah standing in the entrance, her face pale but determined. Of course, this was her regular route home from work. Emma saw her too. I don't want to talk to her, she said loudly, turning her back. Sarah took a step forward, but I caught her eye and shook my head once, definitively. She hesitated, then backed away, the bell chiming again as she left. Mom? Sophie asked in a small voice. Can we go now? I don't feel like ice cream anymore. We gathered our things, Emma clutching her violin case like a shield. As we walked to the car, my phone lit up with a text from Sarah. Please let me explain to them. They're like my own children. I deleted it without responding. She'd lost all rights to my children the moment she'd decided to destroy their family. The drive home was quiet, both girls lost in their thoughts. As we pulled into our driveway, James's car was already there. He was pacing on the front porch, phone in hand. Girls, Go up to your rooms and start picking out what you want to pack. First, I said calmly, remember anything we forget, we can replace. They nodded, hurrying past their father without a word. His face crumpled as they ignored his greeting. What have you told them? He demanded as I approached. Why weren't they at their activities? Why aren't they speaking to me? I met his gaze steadily. I told them the truth, James. Something you should have had the courage to do yourself. Now, if you'll excuse me, we have packing to do. The confrontation with James in our soon-to-be former home's entryway was inevitable. He followed me inside, his architect's composure cracking with each step. Victoria, you can't just make unilateral decisions about our children, his voice echoed through the foyer. Moving to Vancouver? Without even discussing it? This is insane. I turned to face him, keeping my voice deliberately calm. Interesting choice of words, James. Unilateral decisions. Like deciding to leave your family for my best friend? Like planning a move to Montreal without consulting me about our children? His face reddened. That's different. Sarah and I... Let me stop you right there, I interrupted, raising my hand. I don't want to hear about you and Sarah. What's done is done. I'm not acting out of spite or revenge. I'm protecting our daughters and giving them a fresh start. Upstairs, I could hear the girls moving around in their rooms, probably listening to every word. I lowered my voice. You made your choice, James. Now I'm making mine. But Vancouver? It's on the other side of the country. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing. How am I supposed to see them? What about their schools, their friends, their activities? All arranged, I replied calmly. West Point Gray Academy has excellent programs for both girls. Emma can continue her violin, Sophie her soccer. They'll have the best therapist to help them adjust. Everything has been carefully planned. You can't do this, he said, but his voice had lost its certainty. I'll fight you in court. I smiled, almost pitying him. With what grounds, James? The prenup gives me primary custody in case of infidelity. The house is primarily in my name. You're planning to move to Montreal with my best friend. Hardly a strong position for a custody battle. His shoulders slumped. When? The house closes in 10 days. We're moving to the Four Seasons tomorrow while the movers pack everything. 10 days? His voice cracked. You've already sold the house? I walked to the kitchen, him trailing behind me. Miranda found a cash buyer. No conditions, quick closing. Perfect timing, really. Victoria, please. His voice took on a pleading tone. We can work something out. The girls need both their parents. They needed both their parents before you decided to blow up their world, I responded, my calm finally cracking slightly. They needed their father to be faithful to their mother. They needed their Aunt Sarah to be trustworthy. But here we are. A small sound made us both turn. Emma stood in the doorway, her face tear-stained but determined. I want to go to Vancouver, she said clearly. I don't want to stay here anymore. James took a step toward her. Emmy, sweetheart? Don't call me that, she snapped. You're leaving us anyway. You and Aunt Sarah are going to Montreal. At least Mom's taking us with her. Sophie appeared behind her sister, clutching her favorite soccer ball. I hate Montreal, she added, with all the fierce conviction of an 8-year-old. I watched James absorb the impact of his daughter's words, saw the moment he realized the full consequences of his choices. The carefully constructed narrative he and Sarah had created of an amicable separation, of maintaining close relationships with the girls, was crumbling before his eyes. Girls, I said gently, why don't you go back upstairs? The movers will be here tomorrow morning to pack your rooms. Make sure anything special is set aside. They turned and left, Emma's arm protectively around her little sister's shoulders. The sound of their footsteps on the stairs echoed through the suddenly silent house. They'll come around, James said finally. but he didn't sound convinced. Once they understand what? I cut him off. That their father and honorary aunt betrayed their mother? That the two people they trusted most after me were lying to everyone? What exactly should they understand, James? He sank into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly looking older than his 42 years. This isn't how it was supposed to go. No, I agreed. It wasn't. But your actions have consequences. You and Sarah wanted a fresh start in Montreal? Fine. The girls and I will have our fresh start in Vancouver. My phone buzzed, the movers confirming tomorrow's schedule. I think you should leave now, I said quietly. The girls need space to process everything. Your lawyer can contact Robert about visitation arrangements. He stood slowly, looking around the kitchen as if seeing it for the first time. All our memories in this house are just that. Memories, I finished. Sometimes that's all we can take with us. I watched him walk to the door, his shoulders bent as if carrying a heavy weight. At the last moment, he turned. I never meant to hurt them. But you did, I replied simply. Now we all have to live with that. The door closed behind him with a quiet click. Through the window, I watched him get into his car, sit there for a long moment, then finally drive away. Upstairs, I could hear the girls talking quietly in Emma's room. My phone buzzed again. Sarah this time. James just called. Please, can we talk about this like adults? I blocked her number without responding. There was nothing left to say. 6. Weeks later, I stood in our new Vancouver home, watching the sunset paint the Pacific Ocean in shades of gold and pink. The floor-to-ceiling windows that had first attracted me to this house now served as a daily reminder of how far we'd come, both literally and figuratively. Emma was practicing violin in her studio, the haunting melody of Tchaikovsky floating through the house. Her new music teacher, a former concert violinist, had already tagged her as a prodigy. Sophie was in the backyard, practicing soccer drills with her new team captain. Their laughter drifted up, a sound I hadn't heard enough of in recent weeks. Phone lit up with an email from Robert Chen. The house in Forest Hill had closed successfully, the money was in my account, and all the paperwork was finalized. It was really over. Mom? Emma appeared in the doorway, violin still in hand. Can we talk? I patted the space beside me on the window seat. At 10, she'd somehow grown older in these past weeks, carrying herself with a new kind of maturity. What's on your mind, sweetheart? Dad called again, she said, carefully placing her violin in its case. He wants us to come to Montreal for Christmas. I kept my face neutral. How do you feel about that? She was quiet for a moment, watching her sister play soccer below. I'm not ready, she said finally. And I don't think Sophie is either. Is that bad? I pulled her close. No, honey. Your feelings are never bad. You're allowed to take all the time you need. Aunt Sarah sent me an email too, she continued. She said she misses us and wants to explain everything. The familiar surge of anger rose in my chest, but I pushed it down. What did you do? Deleted it, she said simply. I don't want her explanations. Sophie's voice called up from the garden. Mom! Emma! Come see my new trick! We made our way downstairs and out to the backyard. The Pacific breeze carried the salt smell of the ocean, so different from Toronto's urban air. Sophie demonstrated her new soccer move, beaming with pride when we applauded. Ms. Thompson says I might make team captain next season, she announced, referring to her new coach. And guess what? We're playing against Montreal in the spring tournament. I caught the flash of satisfaction in her eyes. At 8, her form of processing the betrayal was excelling at everything Montreal-related, determined to prove something to the father who had moved there. My phone buzzed. A text from James. The girls aren't answering my calls. Please, Victoria, don't turn them against me. I showed the message to Emma, letting her read it. You see? I said gently. Your father loves you, but you get to decide when and how you want to communicate with him. No one can force you. She nodded, understanding the deeper message. We weren't cutting James out. We were letting the girls set their own boundaries, navigate their own healing. Later that evening, after the girls were in bed, I sat in my home office reviewing some work documents. The Vancouver office had welcomed me warmly, and the Asia-Pacific merger was proceeding smoothly. Life had settled into new rhythms. An email notification popped up. From Sarah. My finger hovered over the delete button, but something made me open it. Victoria, I know you probably won't read this, but I need to say it anyway. You were right. About everything. James and I thought we were writing some great love story, but all we did was destroy something beautiful. The girl's silence is killing him. Montreal isn't what we thought it would be. Nothing is. I'm sorry. I know it means nothing now, but I'm sorry. Sarah. I closed the email without responding. She was right. Her apology meant nothing now. We had built something new from the ashes of their betrayal, something stronger than what they had destroyed. A knock at my office door. Emma again, in her pajamas. I can't sleep, she admitted. Come here. I patted my lap, and she curled up like she used to when she was smaller. Want to help me design your music studio? We spent the next hour looking at paint colors and acoustic panels, planning the space that would be hers alone. As she finally dozed off, I carried her to bed, tucking her in beside her sleeping sister. Sophie had taken to sneaking into Emma's room, the two of them finding comfort in their shared experience. Standing in the doorway, watching my daughters sleep, I felt the final pieces settle into place. The validation wasn't improving anything to James or Sarah. It was in this moment, in the peace on my daughters' faces, in the strength we had found together. 3 months into our new life in Vancouver, the transformation was undeniable. The modern house overlooking the Pacific had become more than just a residence. It was the physical manifestation of our fresh start. Each room held new memories, untainted by betrayal, each space carefully curated to reflect who we were becoming rather than who we'd been. I stood in my home office, preparing for a video call with the Singapore team, when Emma burst in, her face flushed with excitement. Mom! Ms. Chen wants me to perform a solo at the Winter Showcase. Her violin case was clutched to her chest, a shield-turned trophy. She says I'm progressing faster than any student she's had. The joy in her voice was genuine, not the forced happiness she'd worn like a mask in those first difficult weeks. Her new violin teacher, a stern but nurturing woman who'd performed with the Vancouver Symphony Orchestra, had been instrumental in helping Emma channel her emotions into music. That's wonderful, sweetheart. I pulled her into a hug, breathing, in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. Have you told your father? Her smile dimmed slightly. Not yet. Maybe after the showcase? If he wants to come, he can, but it's your decision, I assured her. There's no rush. Sophie's voice echoed from downstairs. Mom, Emma, come quick. You have to see this. We found her in the kitchen, her laptop, open to her soccer team's website. Look, we're playing Montreal in the semifinals. If we win, we go to nationals. The irony wasn't lost on me. Of all the teams they could face, it had to be Montreal. Sophie's eyes blazed with determination. Dad said Montreal's team was better, remember? Before everything. I want to show him he's wrong. I watched. My youngest daughter saw the fire in her that mirrored my own. She'd taken her hurt and transformed it into drive, just as I had. Then we better step up your practice schedule, shouldn't we? The doorbell rang. Dr. Harrison, the child psychologist, who'd been working with the girls since our move. She'd become a regular fixture in our lives, helping the girls process their emotions in healthy ways. Good session? I asked an hour later, as the girls emerged from the family room they used for therapy. Dr. H says we're doing really well, Sophie reported. She says it's okay that I still get angry sometimes when I think about Dad and Aunt Sarah. Emma nodded solemnly. And she says it's okay that I'm not ready to visit Montreal. Dad keeps asking, but your feelings are valid, I reminded them, echoing Dr. Harrison's frequent refrain. You get to decide when you're ready. Later that evening, after the girls were absorbed in homework, I sat on our oceanfront terrace watching the sunset. My phone buzzed with a text from James. The girls' school sent me their progress reports. They're doing amazing. I see now that you made the right choice. Vancouver is good for them, better than Montreal would have been. It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging the truth, that my drastic decision to move across the country had actually been the best thing for our daughters. I didn't respond, but saved the message. Perhaps someday the girls would want to see it. My assistant knocked on the terrace door. Mrs. Chen, the Singapore team is ready for your call, and the New York office sent over the merger documents for review. Work had become a different kind of sanctuary now. The Vancouver office had welcomed me as a conquering hero, the woman who'd secured the Asia-Pacific merger. My reputation for strategic thinking had only been enhanced by how smoothly I'd managed my personal transition. After the call, I found Emma in her music studio, working on her showcase piece. The room, with its perfect acoustics and view of the mountains, had become her refuge. The music she played now was different, deeper, more complex, filled with emotions she was still learning to express. Sophie was in the backyard practicing penalty kicks in the fading light. Each strike of the ball was precise, determined. She'd transformed her hurt into athletic discipline, rising to team captain faster than anyone had expected. My phone lit up with another message, this time from Sarah. The house in Forest Hill is on the market again. James saw the listing and, well, I don't know why I'm telling you this. Maybe because you were right about everything. Montreal isn't what we thought it would be. I deleted the message without emotion. Their regrets were no longer my concern. We had built something new here, something stronger than what they had destroyed. A knock at the front door surprised me. It was Lisa, my assistant, returning with an unexpected delivery. These came to the office for you, she said, holding out a small package. Inside was my old house key from Forest Hill, along with a note from Miranda Zhang. The new owners are finally renovating. Thought you might want this as a reminder of how far you've come. I held the key for a moment, feeling its familiar weight. Then I walked to the terrace and threw it into the ocean, watching it disappear into the waves. We didn't need reminders of the past anymore. We were writing a new story now, one where betrayal was just the beginning, not the end. 6 months into our Vancouver life, spring arrived with a burst of cherry blossoms and new beginnings. The modern glass house that had once felt like a strategic retreat now pulsed with life and laughter. Our transformation wasn't just survival anymore. We were thriving. That morning, I stood in the kitchen, watching Emma practice her violin, through the studio's glass walls while Sophie did her pre-game stretches on the back lawn. The national soccer semifinals against Montreal were a week away, and the tension in our household was palpable. "Mom?" Sophie called, coming inside for breakfast. "Can we talk about something important?" I poured her a glass of orange juice, noting the serious look on her face. "Of course, sweetheart." Dad called again last night. He wants to come to the semi-finals. She picked at her pancakes, her usual pre-game appetite diminished. He says he hasn't seen us play in so long, and since it's against Montreal. Emma appeared in the kitchen, violin bow still in hand. "Are you going to let him come?" I sat down between them. "That's not my decision to make. You both get to choose if you're ready to see him." Sophie pushed her plate away. What if he brings her?" The her didn't need clarification. Sarah's shadow still loomed over certain conversations, though smaller now, less powerful. I could ask Robert to make it clear that she's not welcome, I offered. But again, it's your choice, both of you. Emma set her bow down carefully. I think it might be okay if Dad comes. Just Dad. I want him to see my solo at the E. Showcase next month too, but I'm not ready for her. Sophie nodded vigorously. Yeah, just Dad, and he has to sit on the opposite side of the field from us. I smiled at their negotiations, proud of how they were learning to set boundaries. I'll have Robert draw up the conditions. Dad can take it or leave it. My phone buzzed, a message from James. The girls mentioned the soccer semifinals. I'd really like to be there. I know I don't deserve it, but please. I showed them the message. Should I respond? The girls exchanged looks, having one of their silent conversations they'd developed over the past months. Finally, Sophie spoke. Tell him he can come, but make sure he knows the rules. I typed out a response. The girls are willing to see you, under certain conditions. Robert will send the details. This is their choice. Respect it. Later that morning, as I prepared for a video conference with the New York office, I overheard the girls talking in Emma's music studio. Do you think Dad will actually come? Sophie asked, lying on the floor while Emma practiced. Mom says he hasn't missed any support payments. That means he still cares, right? I guess. I just don't want him to bring Aunt Sarah. I don't want to see her ever again. Me neither. But Dr. Harrison says that's okay. We don't have to forgive them just because they're sorry. Their wisdom sometimes took my breath away. They'd grown so much in these past months, not just in height, but in emotional maturity. My phone lit up with another message, this time from Sarah. James told me about the semifinals. I understand why I'm not welcome. Just tell the girls I miss them? I deleted it without showing the girls. They didn't need her emotional manipulation, her attempts to cling to a role she'd willingly destroyed. The day continued with its new normal rhythms. Emma's violin practice filled the house with Tchaikovsky, while Sophie worked with her private soccer coach in the backyard. I moved between video calls and document reviews, our lives interweaving in this space we'd made our own. Dr. Harrison arrived for the girls' weekly session, and I retreated to my home office. Through the window, I could see container ships crossing the Pacific, heading to distant ports. Sometimes I thought about that night in Singapore, how a single phone call had set us on this path. How destruction had led to creation. Mrs. Chen? Lisa appeared in my doorway. The New York team needs the merger documents, and there's something else. She hesitated. Sarah Williams has been trying to reach you through the corporate office. Block all her attempts, I said firmly. Personal and professional. She lost the right to any connection with this family. The afternoon brought a surprise visit from Emma's violin teacher, Ms. Chen. Victoria, I hope you don't mind me dropping by, but I had to tell you in person. I've recommended Emma for the Young Musicians International Competition in London. My heart swelled with pride. Emma had transformed her pain into music, creating something beautiful from the ashes of betrayal. As evening settled over Vancouver, we gathered on the terrace for dinner. The Pacific stretched endlessly before us, its waters turning gold in the setting sun. Sophie was discussing soccer strategies while Emma hummed her competition piece. Mom, Sophie said suddenly, I'm glad we moved here. Even though, the reason was sad. I'm happy this is our home now. Emma nodded in agreement. Me too. Everything's different here, but different good. I looked at my daughters, these remarkable girls who had faced betrayal and emerged stronger. Different good, I echoed. That's exactly what it is. The day of the soccer semifinals dawned bright and clear. The Vancouver sports complex buzzed with energy as teams from across Canada gathered for the National Youth Tournament. Sophie was already on the field for warm-ups, her captain's armband gleaming in the morning sun, while Emma sat beside me in the stands, nervously fingering her violin case. "Dad just texted," Emma said quietly. "He's here." I scanned the opposite bleachers and spotted him, James, sitting alone, looking somehow smaller than I remembered. He'd followed the rules, staying on the designated side, coming without Sarah. When he caught sight of us, he raised his hand in an uncertain wave. Emma waved back hesitantly. "It's weird," she whispered. "I thought I'd be more upset seeing him." "Feelings change," I replied, squeezing her hand. "That's okay too." The Montreal team took the field, their burgundy uniforms a stark contrast to Vancouver's blue and white. Sophie stood taller, her shoulders squaring as she led her team through their final warm-up drills. From across the field, I could see James watching her, pride and regret warring on his face. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the National Youth Soccer Championship semifinals," the announcer's voice boomed. "Today's match, Montreal United versus Vancouver Velocity." The game began intensely, both teams showing why they'd made it to the semifinals. Sophie played with a focus I'd never seen before, her passes precise, her defense impenetrable. When she scored the first goal 20 minutes in, the Vancouver crowd erupted. "That's my sister," Emma shouted, jumping up and down. I caught James's reaction across the field. He'd leaped to his feet too, then settled back down, uncertain of his right to celebrate. My phone buzzed, a message from Sarah. "James is sending me videos. Sophie's amazing. They both are. I wish—" I deleted it without reading further. This was Sophie's moment, untainted by the past. The game remained tight through the second half. With 5 minutes left, the score tied 1-1. Sophie got the ball, at midfield. She maneuvered past 2 defenders, her movements fluid and determined. The Montreal goalkeeper crouched, ready. Sophie's foot connected with the ball. Time seemed to slow as it soared through the air, curving just beneath the crossbar. "All!" The stadium erupted. Emma screamed. I jumped up, cheering. Across the field, James was on his feet again, pride overwhelming his hesitation. Vancouver Velocity won 2-1, advancing to the national finals. As her teammates hoisted Sophie onto their shoulders, I saw her scan the crowd. She looked at James, first giving him a small nod, then found us, her face breaking into a radiant smile. Later, in the parking lot, we faced the moment we'd all been anticipating. James approached slowly, respecting the boundaries we'd set. "That was incredible, Sophie," he said softly. "You've become such an amazing player." Sophie straightened, still flushed with victory. "Thanks, Dad. I've been practicing a lot." "Emma," he turned to our eldest, "your teacher sent me a video of your last performance. You're playing pieces I didn't even know you could handle." Emma clutched her violin case closer. "Ms. Chen says I could make the conservatory program next year." The awkward silence that followed spoke volumes. James shifted uncomfortably, clearly, wanting to hug them but respecting their space. "I miss you both," he said finally. "Montreal. It's not. Things aren't. We have to go," Sophie interrupted. "We're celebrating with the team." "Of course," he stepped back. Would it be okay if I came to your next game? And Emma's showcase?" The girls looked at each other, then at me. I kept my face neutral. This was their decision. "Maybe," Emma said carefully. "But the same rules apply." "No, Aunt Sarah," Sophie added firmly. James nodded, accepting their terms. As we walked away, I heard him call out softly, "Victoria?" I turned. "Thank you," he said, "for not keeping them from me. For doing this better than I did." I simply nodded and continued walking. His gratitude meant nothing. I hadn't done it for him. I'd done it for our daughters, who were learning that strength didn't mean cutting people out, but setting healthy boundaries. That evening, we celebrated at Sophie's favorite sushi restaurant. Emma entertained us by playing her competition piece, for the other diners, receiving enthusiastic applause. The girls chattered about their upcoming events, the soccer finals, the music showcase, the London competition. "Mom," Sophie said suddenly, "I'm glad Dad came today. But I'm more glad we're here in Vancouver with you." Emma nodded. "We're better here, stronger." I looked at my daughters, Sophie still in her soccer uniform, Emma with her violin beside her, and marveled at their resilience. They'd taken their pain and transformed it into excellence, their hurt into determination. My phone buzzed one last time, another message from Sarah that I deleted without reading. We didn't need her words anymore. We had built something new here, something stronger than betrayal, more powerful than loss. The triumph wasn't just Sophie's victory on the field or Emma's mastery of her violin. It was in the quiet strength we'd found together, in the life we'd built from the ashes of betrayal. As we sat there, sharing sushi and stories, I realized that sometimes the greatest victories come disguised as defeats. 1 year to the day after that fateful phone call in Singapore, I stood on our Vancouver terrace watching the sunset over the Pacific. The modern glass house had transformed from a sanctuary into a home, filled with new memories and fresh beginnings. Emma's music drifted from her studio. She was practicing for her upcoming London competition. In the backyard, Sophie juggled her soccer ball, the national championship medal hanging proudly in her room. My phone lit up with a notification, an email from James. "Victoria, Sarah left. She's moving back to Toronto." Everything we thought we were building in Montreal was an illusion. I know it doesn't matter now, but I understand what I destroyed. Not just our marriage, but the trust of our daughters, the foundation of their childhood. Watching them flourish in Vancouver, seeing them grow stronger despite my betrayal, it's shown me how wrong I was about everything. I don't expect forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you were right. You've given our girls something I couldn't: strength, stability, and the knowledge that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well. James. I deleted the email without responding. His realizations came too late to matter, but they were no longer necessary for our happiness. "Mom?" Emma appeared in the doorway, violin in hand. "Can we talk?" She settled beside me on the terrace, Sophie joining us moments later. The three of us sat there watching the sky paint itself in shades of pink and gold. "Ms. Chen thinks I could get into Juilliard in a few years," Emma said quietly. "And Sophie's been scouted by the national youth team." "Dad called today," Sophie added. "He told us about Aunt Sarah. He wanted to know if we'd consider visiting him in Montreal now that she's gone." I looked at my daughters, no longer the shell-shocked girls who'd fled Toronto a year ago, but confident young women who knew their own minds. "What did you tell him?" I asked. "We said maybe," Emma replied. "But not right away. We have our own lives now. Good lives." Sophie nodded. "I told him he could come to my games and Emma's concerts if he wants, but we're not ready to leave Vancouver. This is home now. This is home." The simple truth of their words settled over us. This was home, not because we were running from something, but because we had built something worth staying for. My phone buzzed one final time. Sarah trying one last time to explain, to apologize, to find absolution. I blocked her number without reading the message. Some chapters needed to stay closed. "You know what's funny?" Emma said, watching the last rays of sun disappear. "A year ago, when everything happened, I thought our lives were over, but really they were just beginning." Sophie leaned against my shoulder. "We're stronger now, aren't we, Mom? Not just okay, but better." I pulled them both close, these remarkable daughters who had taught me as much about resilience as I had taught them. Yes, we are. Sometimes the things that seem like endings are really just beautiful beginnings in disguise. As the stars began to appear over the Pacific, I thought about that night in Singapore, when one phone call had shattered our world. Had taken those broken pieces and built something new, not a replica of what was lost, but something stronger, more authentic, more our own. The betrayal that was meant to break us had instead become our foundation. We had transformed pain into power, heartbreak into healing, an ending into a beginning. Our story wasn't about revenge or even forgiveness. It was about the quiet strength of starting over, the courage to build something new from the ashes of what was lost. Emma picked up her violin, playing softly as the night settled around us. Sophie hummed along, her soccer ball forgotten at her feet. And I sat there, holding my daughters close, knowing that sometimes the greatest victory isn't in getting even, but in getting better. We had done more than survive. We had thrived. And that was the best revenge of all.